When love is twisted in the vortex of money and disease, can you still recognize the person you once loved deeply? The story of Juno and Cedric is such a tragedy teased by fate, writing a heartbreaking chapter in the interweaving of love and hate. In the high school campus, the sun shines through the mottled leaves and sprinkles on the ground, outlining pieces of light and shadow on the ground. The love between Juno and Cedric is like a flower quietly blooming in spring, dear and beautiful. Every morning, Cedric rides the shabby but sweet bicycle and appears at the alley on time. He always arrives 10 minutes early, while waiting, nervously tidying up his clothes, and looking in the direction of Juno's house from time to time. When he sees Juno's figure appear, his eyes light up instantly, and he greets him with joy. Their breakfast is simple but happy. A meat bun and 2 cups of soy milk can make each other's mouths smile. Cedric always gently lies to Juno that he has eaten, but in fact his breakfast is often just a glass of water. Watching Juno bite off the origiamo with satisfaction, his eyes were full of doting, as if the whole world was concentrated on the girl in front of him. At that time, they would share each other's little secrets on the way to school, argue over a math problem, stroll in the playground after school, watch the sunset, firmly believe that love can overcome everything, and the picture of the future slowly unfolds in their hearts, full of infinite possibilities. However, the storm of fate always comes inadvertently. Juno's mother was ruthlessly entangled with a terminal illness. The corridor of the hospital was filled with the pungent smell of disinfectant, and the clock on the wall ticked, as if counting down. The doctor's heavy words were like a heavy hammer, shattering the peace of Juno's family. This disease has a very high probability of inheritance. Not only is Juno likely to be entangled by the disease at any time, but if he gets married and has children in the future, the child may not be spared. On the day when his mother fell ill, blood flowed like a nightmare, and a basin of nosebleed filled the whole room with a breath of despair. She was in a coma for 3 whole days. During these 3 days, Juno stayed by the bed, holding his mother's hand tightly, not daring to let go for a moment, and tears kept falling on his mother's hand. After waking up, the mother used a weak voice that was almost inaudible, and used all her strength to let Juno leave Cedric. Juno's world collapsed in an instant, and tears flowed uncontrollably. She murmured to herself over and over again, "Mom, he won't dislike me." That voice was filled with endless struggle and reluctance. The mother gently held her hand, her eyes full of heartache and helplessness. "Mom knows that he is a good child. You have been together since high school, and I have seen how good he is to you. But it is precisely because he is so good that I feel sorry for him. His grandmother is also sick and hospitalized. He has been overwhelmed by the burden of life. In addition to the situation of our family, how can he fly?" Juno bit her lip tightly, and the pain in her heart was like a surging tide, drowning her. She knew that her mother was right, but she really couldn't bear to let go of Cedric's hand. At the same time, Cedric's life was also stuck in a quagmire. In order to treat his grandmother's illness, he ran around, studied hard in school during the day, and took the time to do exercises during the break, just to get a scholarship. After school, he went to work non-stop. When distributing flyers, he stayed on the street regardless of the wind and sun, patiently handing flyers to passers-by. When delivering takeout, he shuttled through the streets and alleys of the city, and even in bad weather, he dared not slack off. He has done all kinds of dirty and tiring work, and he was busy every day. The pressure of life was like a mountain, almost suffocating him, but even so, he never thought of giving up his relationship with Juno. In his heart, Juno was the only light in his dark world and the driving force that supported him to persevere. Every time he thought of Juno, a smile would appear on his tired face. Just when Cedric was struggling for life, Juno had to make that difficult decision. She asked Cedric to come to the park they often went to, under the old tree that had witnessed their countless sweet moments. Juno had tears in her eyes, but pretended to be indifferent and said, "Let's break up. I don't want to live this hard life with you anymore." "I'm tired." Cedric was struck by lightning, looking at the familiar yet strange girl in front of him in disbelief. His hands trembled slightly, trying to find a trace of reluctance in her eyes. But Juno turned her head away cruelly and stopped looking at him, fearing that she would not be able to help crying and reveal her true thoughts. At that moment, Cedric's world was spinning in an instant, and his heart was filled with pain and anger. He didn't understand how they, who once loved each other so much, could come to this point. He only knew that he was abandoned by the person he loved the most. The feeling of being betrayed made him feel so painful that he wanted to die, and the seeds of hatred were quietly planted in his heart. After the breakup, Cedric was like a walking corpse. He buried himself in work and study, trying to numb himself with business. At night, he often sat alone in the empty room, looking at the photo of him and Juno on the wall, tears silently sliding down. But the hatred in his heart was also fermenting. He secretly vowed to make himself stronger and make Juno regret leaving him. Years later, Cedric relied on his own efforts and talents to overcome difficulties in the business world and became successful. The boy who was once oppressed by life has now become a well-known figure in the Beijing circle. His company has developed rapidly, and wealth and status are pouring in like a tide. However, the hatred in his heart grew, like wild weeds. He could never forget Junou's departure that year. It was an eternal pain in his heart, so he started his revenge plan and used all means to make Junou marry him. At the wedding, he looked at Junou with no joy in his eyes, only full of revenge. He wanted Junou to pay the price for her decision that year and let her taste the taste of being abandoned and hurt. Married life fell on Junou like a nightmare. Cedric began to indulge himself, and the women around him kept changing like a revolving lantern. He deliberately brought different women home and interacted intimately with them in front of Junou every time, trying to hurt Junou's heart. He would dress up those women carefully, take them to show off in front of Junou, and deliberately talk and laugh loudly to observe Junou's reaction. He wanted to see Junou jealous and sad for him, so that the hatred in his heart could be relieved a little. However, Junou always behaved calmly. She didn't cry or make a fuss, and lived quietly in the study, as if Cedric's actions had nothing to do with her. She immersed herself in books and paintings, using art to relieve the pain in her heart. Her indifference made Cedric even more angry. He didn't understand why Junou could be so calm. He felt that his revenge did not achieve the desired effect, which made him even more crazy. Until one day, Junou felt extremely unwell, with frequent dizziness, fatigue, and inexplicable pain. She went to the hospital for a checkup, and while waiting for the results, her heart was full of anxiety. When the doctor regretfully told her that she would probably only live until next spring, this news was like a heavy hammer, hitting Junou's heart hard. But she was unusually calm, perhaps because the pain she had experienced over the years had made her indifferent to life and death. She did not tell Cedric the news, because she knew that their relationship had long been broken, and this news might be just a trivial matter to him. During the days when Cedric was crazy about revenge, Junou silently counted down her life. She watched Cedric entangled with different women, with no jealousy in her heart, only endless sadness. She often recalled the good times she had with Cedric alone in the middle of the night, and hurt ears with the pillow. In the 3rd year of marriage with Cedric, fate dealt Junou another heavy blow. He kept a young and beautiful female college student named Olivia. Olivia had a pure and lovely face, and two shallow dimples when she smiled, which made anyone happy. Her lively eyes seemed to hide endless stars, and her long black hair draped softly over her shoulders, exuding a youthful atmosphere. Cedric was particularly concerned about Olivia and rented a spacious and bright apartment for her. The decoration inside was exquisite and luxurious, and every detail was carefully designed. He also often took her to high-end restaurants for dinner. In the restaurant, Cedric would gently order food for her and carefully serve her dishes. When shopping with her, as long as Olivia looked at something more, Cedric would buy it without hesitation and buy her all kinds of brand-name bags and clothes. As long as Olivia wanted something, Cedric would do everything he could to satisfy her. In the past 6 months, Olivia has become a frequent visitor in Cedric's life. In addition to Junou, she is the woman who has stayed with Cedric the longest. Friends all advised Junou to be careful. They all saw that Cedric seemed to be sincere about Olivia. This made Junou feel mixed emotions. Who used to be gentle to her now gave all his tenderness to another woman. Her heart was full of bitterness and helplessness. The first time I met Olivia was on Junou's birthday. Since the morning, Junou's body has been abnormal. She has frequent nosebleed and can't stop it. The blood dripped on the white sheets, forming dazzling red plums. Her face became as pale as paper, and she looked weak, as if a gust of wind could blow her down. In desperation, she could only go to the hospital for examination. The doctor looked at the examination report, frowned, and told her solemnly that she could only live until next spring. Junou didn't feel much when she heard the news. She just nodded gently and whispered, "It's okay. I'm not afraid of death, but I'm a little afraid of pain." In her heart, death may not be the most terrible thing. What is terrible is the unhealed pain in life. I heard that there's a very expensive medicine that can make her live more comfortably in her last days. But the money in the bank card was not enough. In order to relieve some of the pain, Junou decided to go to Cedric's company to find him. When she walked into the company, she happened to meet Olivia. Olivia had just graduated and was now working as a secretary for Cedric. She was wearing a fashionable professional suit and delicate makeup, which made her particularly dazzling in the company. Cedric was in a meeting, so Junou sat on the sofa outside and waited for him quietly. Olivia kept staring at Junou curiously, with a hint of disdain in her eyes. She secretly whispered to her colleagues around her, "She is the boss's wife. She is so ugly, dry, and looks like she is about to die. You all say that I look like her, But how can I be like her? I am much prettier than her. Although Olivia's voice was not loud, it was still clearly heard by Juno in this quiet environment. Juno looked at her reflection on the bright glass. She was bare sides and wearing a bloated down jacket. She really looked haggard and gloomy. She knew that she didn't look good now, and she also knew that she was really going to die. At this time, a colleague pulled Olivia and whispered nervously, "That's because she didn't dress up. If she put on makeup, 10 of you combined would not be as pretty as her. Also, don't take advantage of the boss's pampering and provoke her. You don't know how much the boss loves her. If you make her unhappy, be careful that the boss will kill you." The colleague's words were full of worry. She knew Cedric's feelings for Juno very well, and she was also worried that Olivia would get into trouble because of her willfulness. Olivia was very dissatisfied when she heard her colleague's words. She curled her lips and rolled her eyes at Juno. Then, she deliberately brought a cup of tea with a hypocritical smile on her face and asked Juno in a soft voice, "Juno, how could the boss bear to let you wait for so long? It's so strange. Every time I came to see him before, no matter how busy he was, he would come to accompany me first. He said that I was the most important. I thought he was so considerate to other women." As Olivia spoke, she curved her eyes and smiled sweetly, but there was a hint of pride and provocation in that smile. The way she smiled was indeed somewhat similar to Juno when he was young, so youthful and full of energy. Juno looked at Olivia, without a trace of jealousy in his heart, but just smiled at her calmly, and then asked gently, "You are so important. How could Cedric bear to let you be a shameful mistress? You should persuade him to divorce me as soon as possible and marry you home." Juno's voice was very soft, but like a sharp knife piercing Olivia's heart directly. Olivia's face turned ugly when she heard Juno's words. She was angry and cursed in a low voice. "The one who is not loved is the mistress, and you are the superfluous one. Didn't you rely on the fact that you met Mr. Shen a few years earlier than me? But now you are old and ugly. What can you use to compete with me?" Olivia became more and more excited, and her eyes were full of anger and unwillingness. She felt that she was the one that Cedric really loved, and Juno was just a stumbling block to her happiness. Her colleague was probably afraid that the matter would get out of hand, so he hurried over to grab her and tried to pull her away. The colleague said anxiously, "Kyo Kaleo, stop talking, come with me." The colleague's face was full of worry. She was afraid that Olivia's impulse would bring trouble to herself and the company. In fact, Juno really didn't care. She had already promised herself that she would not be angry for Cedric, nor would she be sad for Cedric. She would not be jealous of other women for him. In her opinion, Cedric was no longer the person who was worth everything she had to give up. His actions had completely disappointed her. At this moment, Olivia was pulled by her colleagues, but she still struggled unwillingly, muttering, "I'm not afraid of her. What's so great about her?" She stumbled and fell forward, and the teacup in her hand flew out instantly, and fell to the ground with a snap, breaking into countless pieces. Her palm was also cut by the sharp glass fragments, leaving a deep wound, and blood immediately gushed out, dripping on the ground, and soon gathered into a small pool. Cedric saw this scene clearly through the glass of the conference room. His eyes suddenly became cold, and the expression on his face was terribly gloomy. Before everyone could react, he had already angrily thrown down the documents in his hand, pushed open the door of the conference room, and strode over. He did not hesitate to pull Olivia into his arms, his movements full of tension and concern. He hugged Olivia tightly, as if announcing to the world that she was the one he wanted to protect. Then he coldly cursed. Who the hell hurt her? The voice was full of anger and threats, which made people shudder. The kind colleague was frightened by this sudden questioning and turned pale, and her body took 2 steps back involuntarily. Her lips trembled slightly, and she wanted to explain, but she was frightened by Cedric's momentum and couldn't speak. Her eyes were full of fear and helplessness, and she could only stand there blankly at a loss. Juno looked at the eyes seeing this scene. The strong sense of ridicule surged in her heart. She sneered and said frivolously, "I did it, and she deserves it." Although her voice was calm, it was firm and firm. She looked straight into Cedric's eyes without flinching. In her opinion, Olivia's behavior was self-inflicted, and she didn't think she did anything wrong. Olivia cried even harder when she heard Juno's words. She stared at Juno while crying and shouted, "Yes, I deserve it. Who made me fall in love with someone I shouldn't love? I was called a mistress and a mistress. But Mr. Shen, as long as you love me, I will stay by your side for the rest of my life, and no one can separate me from you." Her voice became a little hoarse because of crying, but her eyes revealed a firmness and persistence. She grabbed Cedric's clothes tightly, as if it was her only lifeline. She cried so pitifully, and even said such a ridiculous thing. She seemed so brave and firm. Cedric was amused by her appearance. He raised his hand and gently wiped away the tears on her face, and gently coaxed, "Be good, You've cried like a little cat. His voice was so soft that it seemed to drip water, which was completely different from his attitude towards others just now. His eyes were full of pampering and love. Looking at Olivia, it was as if he was looking at the most precious baby in the world. Juno looked at this scene and her heart was stabbed. In the past, Cedric also treated her so gently, but now, all this has become a thing of the past. She lowered her eyelids, not wanting to look at this dazzling scene anymore, and only said to Cedric, "This year's birthday, I want 500,000. Her voice was a little hoarse, with a hint of fatigue. It's funny to say that they are husband and wife, but they don't even have each other's contact information. Juno never takes the initiative to find Cedric except for asking for money. Before they got married, they agreed that he wanted her and she wanted his money. Cedric always hated her for being a gold digger, but in the past, as long as she asked, no matter how much money, he would give it to her, no more, no less. Only this time Cedric smiled at her, and his smile was very cold. He said slowly, "You can ask for money, but, Juno, lower your noble head first and say sorry to Kiao Kiao." His voice was full of sarcasm and teasing, as if he was watching a joke. He just wanted to use this $500,000 to buy Juno's self-esteem and buy an apology to Olivia. Juno was furious when she heard Cedric's words. She couldn't believe that the man who once loved her so much would humiliate her in this way for another woman. Her hands were clenched into fists, and her nails were deeply embedded in her palms, leaving white marks. Her body trembled slightly, and she tried to suppress the anger in her heart. She raised her head and looked straight into Cedric's eyes, which were full of disappointment and despair. At this moment, Juno suddenly felt that the man in front of her was so strange. She endured the sudden pain in her body and turned away. She didn't want the money. Walking out of the revolving door of Cedric's company, the cold winter wind scraped across her cheeks like a blade, and Juno staggered and held onto the sycamore tree by the roadside. The fishy sweetness rose in her nose again, and blood dripped through her fingers onto the snow, blurring out dark red flowers. She suddenly remembered how Cedric wiped her nosebleed with his sleeve in high school. At that time, the boy's eyes were as bright as stars, and he said, "Don't be afraid, Meng Meng." But now, his tenderness has been given to others, and he has personally crushed her as dignity. Juno took out her mobile phone and trembled to delete the number that she had never dialed. Tears mixed with snow water blurred her vision. It turned out that the most painful thing was not the turn and the illness, but the person who once held the top of her heart, who personally stabbed her chest with a knife. Juno stumbled back home and collapsed on the cold bed. The snow outside the window was getting heavier and heavier, dyeing the whole world pale. She curled up into a small ball, letting the tears flow freely. The pain in her body and the pain in her heart intertwined, making it almost impossible for her to breathe. There was a yellowed photo on the bedside table. The boy and girl in the photo were smiling like flowers. That was their best time. Now, everything has changed. Juno stroked the photo with trembling fingers and suddenly coughed violently. The blood stained the white sheets read, and also stained the past that could never be returned. Late at night, Juno's phone suddenly vibrated. It was a message from the hospital that the new drug application failed. She stared at the cold text on the screen and pulled a bitter smile at the corner of her mouth. The snow outside the window was still falling. In a trance, she seemed to hear Cedric say in her ear again, "Don't be afraid, Meng Meng." But now the shoulder that she could rely on has long become someone else's harbor. Juno slowly closed his eyes and buried his face in the pillow. The sobs that had been suppressed for a long time finally broke through the defense line and Decker in the empty room. Just as Juno was crying desperately, the internal phone in Cedric's office rang suddenly. The secretary's cautious voice was filled with uneasiness. "Mr. Shenhais. Medical records in the hospital. Were seen by Miss Chu." The rustling sound of paper came from the receiver, and Cedric's hand holding the pen suddenly tightened, and the ink dripped onto the contract, creating a dark stain. He remembered Juno's pale face just now, and his staggering steps when he turned around, and suddenly felt that Olivia's voice leaning on his shoulder and acting Coca the Sly was horribly harsh. He pushed Olivia away, grabbed his coat and rushed out. Olivia was thrown to the ground and looked at him in disbelief. "Mr. Shen, how are you going?" Cedric turned a deaf ear to him, only to feel his throat tighten. In his memory, Juno would feel dizzy every time she had a nosebleed. Just now, she left alone, and as she fainted on the way, this thought was like a poisonous snake biting his heart. He didn't care about the crowded elevator, and rushed directly into the emergency passage, running downstairs into steps. Snow particles hit the iron wall of the fire escape with a crackling sound. Cedric's leather shoes hit the steps heavily, causing his knees to ache. He recalled the medical exam over by his assistant last month, which he had casually thrown into the deep of the drawer. The red words next to Juno's name now exploded in front of his eyes, her editory thrombopation. Cold sweat trickled down his spine. He suddenly remembered that when he was working overtime last night, he glimpsed through the crack in the door and saw that the desk lamp in the study was on until 3 in the morning. Juno was curled up on the carpet painting watercolors. The moonlight stretched her shadow thin and long, like a dead leaf that could be blown away by the wind at any time. When he finally opened the door, he was greeted by a strong smell of blood. The moonlight came in through the gap in the curtains, illuminating Juno's figure curled up in the corner of the bed. Beside his pillow was a blood-soaked tissue, like a withered red plum. She turned around with difficulty when she heard the sound. There were still traces of tears on her pale face, but she smiled with relief. "Cedric, look this time." "No one wiped my nosebleed." Cedric froze in place. His throat seemed to be gripped by an iron clamp. Memory and reality collided violently at this moment. The girl with a ponytail who laughed crisply on the back seat of his bicycle was so weak that she seemed to disappear in the wind in the next second. He staggered to the bed, his trembling hands hanging in her hair and not daring to let go. Juno used up his last strength to stuff the yellowed photo into his palm, and his cold fingertips wiped his hot tears. "I'm sorry. I lied to you back then." Before he finished speaking, the harsh long beep of the surveillance camera tore through the silence, and the snow outside the window suddenly became so heavy that the starlight could not be seen. Cedric finally collapsed and hugged her in his arms, but the warmth from his palm was rapidly dissipating, just like the morning light that could never be seen at the alley that year. The cold wind whistled and slapped the window, as if to blow away the sorrow in the room, but helplessly left tear marks on the glass. Cedric hugged Juno, who was gradually getting colder, and his tears were like a flood that burst the dam, wantonly dripping on her face that had already lost its color. He called her name over and over again, his voice full of regret and despair, but the only response he got was the dead silence and the sobbing snow outside the window. Those years blinded by hatred, those cruel revenges, now turned into sharp blades, cutting his heart again and again. It turned out that in the countless days and nights burned by hatred, Juno had already swallowed the sentence of fate alone. He punished her, betrayal, in the cruelest way, but he didn't know the test report she hid when she turned around, the bloodstains on her drawing paper late at night, and the heartbreaking farewell behind the word breakup in front of her mother's bed. At this moment, the last warmth of Juno's fingertips dissipated in his palm, and he was shocked to realize that the person he had taken revenge on all these years was just a poor person who was full of scars, but still licking his wounds alone. Cedric trembled and opened Juno's phone. The lock screen was a photo of them under the cherry tree in high school. The latest photo in the album was the first snow outside the window taken this morning, with the caption, "It turns out that the sound of snow falling and the sound of heartbeat stopping sound almost the same." He turned to the memo, which was filled with densely written messages that had not been sent out. "Today I dreamed of you buying me a Rugiamo. The new medicine is expensive, but I don't want you to know. If there is a next life, I will recognize you who was bent by life first. The last message stopped 3 hours ago. Cedric, don't be afraid this time. I don't feel any pain." The snow outside the window was still falling, like silent tears for this tragedy. Cedric buried his head in Juno's hair, greedily absorbing her remaining scent. Memories came flooding back like a tide, and all the love that was concealed by hatred turned into heart-rending pain at this moment. It turned out that he had never let her go, but just used the wrong way, pushing each other into an abyss of no return.